Hey, Stephanie, welcome to Money Bites.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
As a quick intro, Winnie, the startup behind Money Bites, is a platform and a community of women in tech, empowering ourselves to feel more comfortable with both building wealth and our career trajectory. So really excited to hear your side of the story and your experience. Give me a quick intro about yourself, and then what is a surprising trivia that people don't know about you?
My name is Stephanie Skuzenski. I am a mother. I am a senior manager at J&J for experience design, and I live in Astoria, New York. My fun fact is some friends of mine, when the Super Bowl was in Detroit, that's where I'm from, there was a big call for any kind of dancers to come be under this rolling tongue for the Rolling Stones. And we tried out and we got to do it. It was really fun. It was freezing, but yeah, that didn't really require dance. It required us to be jumping up and down and just really excited. The thing I remember most is just looking up, being in the center of the Super Bowl and like what it looks like to have that crowd. And it was just really overwhelming, but it was fun.
Our third resident question, what is your first memory of money?
I mean, probably wanting certain clothes and just knowing that some stuff was off limits.
Did that lead to part-time jobs, giving up?
I definitely had part-time jobs. I mean, I've worked since I was, I think, probably like 15. I don't know. It led to me just knowing that some things were probably not for me because they were too expensive.
Do you think that sort of led to your current relationship with money?
Yeah, for sure. I actually think I'm probably pretty frugal with money. I guess my relationship now is like thinking through, do I really need this thing? Or is this a thing that if I had more, again, like it would be accessible to me because I would have more money in general. But so, yeah, I think so.
Is there anything that you want right now that feels not for me?
Well, me and my daughter just came back from Spain and it was our first trip overseas. And that felt a little bit like a stretch, but I felt like we really needed that experience.
It sounds like that experience has stayed with you, but you're through savings, etc., more things are attainable now.
Yeah, and I definitely think experiences make more sense than things. So I think that's why the trip it made it through the filter of like being able to do it.
Would love to continue with that happy memory. When we drew our life and career satisfaction chart together, college was high on your satisfaction. What were you doing in college? What was your major?
It was textile design and material studies. And I think I was really drawn to the material studies end of it, of really researching any kind of material and the context that it holds and the language behind it, and then how you can use that to tell a story.
And you also mentioned this was the time when you got introduced into tech.
Yeah. So I started making installation art and messing around with that. And I wanted sound as part of it and needing to learn how to code to get some of the things I wanted done. So yeah, I started looking more into tech. I want to say the last 2 years of my undergrad, I do think they had a new media department coming in. So my material a lot of the time was actually tech.
And you were just learning this on the go on your own, or?
I mean, I was mostly taking apart websites and trying to put the code back together and seeing if it would still work.
How do you even do that? That sounds so genius.
I don't know. You like go to the inspect code and just copy paste and then try to put it in your own, like Word editor and take out things and put things in and see what breaks it and what doesn't.
So you were tinkering around with websites, with materials in college, and was having the best experience of your life. And then you started thinking, okay, post-college, career aspects, and things changed then.
Yeah. So post-college is when my student loans kicked in. So I think it was the reality of getting that first bill showing what my monthly payment was is when I when I realized I need a quote unquote real job, I guess, and that I wouldn't be in a studio making art. So yeah, it was starting to really look for those jobs and more or less to pay off my student loans.
When you were in college, what did you think you would be doing post-college?
I don't know that I thought it through, to be honest. College was such a dreamy time. I just did not work and really get to study and be curious. So I thought maybe I would stay in academia. I don't know what I thought, to be honest. I thought I would be an artist.
And then reality hit, the student loans rather hit.
Yeah.
What were the first few jobs that you took post-college?
Well, right away when I went home, I actually took a job at the gym at the sign out desk. I would start really early, like at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then I would be done for the day and I could then work on my art. My first job where I felt like I was really using art skills was at an architectural model making company. And it starting to do some of their office management, but slowly being able to do more artistic things and then realizing I should be really trying to look for a job maybe in applied arts.
Even right out of college, you were still trying to be an artist, but then gradually you found your focus area in applied art.
Yeah, I found that I could make graphic design, so I could make posters and stuff. I did stuff for bands, but then websites, being able to make websites from having messed around with the code is what I found that I was able to do and get a job in that. And I actually started just doing freelance work mostly. And one of the clients, their husband, referred me for a job at Digitas, which was an agency, a digital agency within Detroit.
This was also the time when you were first exposed to UX, but not quite UX, as in very similar to your technical endeavors. You were an experimenter, you were a tinkerer.
Yeah, the more I kept thinking about somebody's experience and just thinking through these websites or what these properties somebody needed, I guess I started doing UX without knowing that it was a thing as well.
So at this time, you were focusing mostly on the front end and trying to just give users a better experience.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes it was to give them an experience at all. This was like quite a bit ago, and a lot of these people didn't even have a web property. But then it started to be, how does it connect to social media? What other services do they need on the website? Some of it was e-com.
How did you go about the experimentation of UX?
I mean, I think I was just asking questions or thinking through the user journey. I wasn't yet doing research or talking to users, but it was more just trying to understand what the problem is, trying to come up with a few solutions and see which one just felt like the better experience.
Interesting, though, during this time, your career satisfaction was vibrating up and down on the lower end of the spectrum. What was happening?
Well, there's a couple things happening. I mean, I think I probably thought the work was interesting, but this is also when my daughter was born. It was around 2008, and in Detroit there was a housing crisis. So I think it was the economy; people were losing their jobs, and I was a little bit nervous just about keeping a job and making, having a new baby. So it was probably like exciting that I was able to find something that felt sort of like it was fitting work wise, but then there was just a lot of life happening too.
Life macro situations definitely impacting your career satisfaction, probably the stress of it all.
Yes, the stress.
How are you finding work as a freelancer?
It's funny. At that time, I didn't know full-time employment. So it just seemed natural. What I remember the most needing to learn a lot about was like the back of the house stuff, like the office stuff, and knowing how to bill and invoice and keep very consistent with that to create a stable business. So the rest of it felt pretty natural though.
I think that's one of the things that a lot of freelancers struggle with, to be honest. The work itself, you craft your skill, etc., but it's all the administrative operational stuff that comes with it that just starts to pile on.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was very admirable still during this time, as the economy was being rough, etc., your net worth line still kept going on and up to the right. Were you cognizant in negotiating during this time?
Well, I had this one thing that sticks out in my mind. There was a website this company wanted, and so I pitched for it. I know they had several different people going against it, and mine was by far the cheapest. And I remember winning the work and doing the work and figuring out that the work was way more than I knew. And I was so new to this, I didn't really even know how to come up with a proposal that was probably accurate. But actually, when the website was done, because I really just kept with it, they ended up paying me like 3 times what I had quoted them. They let me know at that time that it was way too little and that I had done a good job. And after that, I remember thinking, I really need to think through how many hours it's going to take. And that I was really grateful at how generous and nice they were. But before that, yeah, I was not negotiating. I mean, I think I was just trying to get the work and I wasn't even thinking through how long it would take or if I would need to hire extra people.
Definitely making sure the scoping is in place.
Yeah.
One other thing that happened during this time was you started to shift your focus from the front end to more of a design systems thinking.
Well, I would say that it was front end for a little while. So I worked at Digitas and I was there for about 5 years. I worked in both Detroit and then I did relocate to New York during that time and worked out of the New York office. That was really helpful to see like a full-time professional job and the way projects are scoped, just a lot of things really foundational to me there. I worked, I think, another job in front end and more like digital design. And then I did go into another branding agency where I was first exposed to like a design system. And I would say, yeah, once I understood that you could create these templates that were reusable and put logic behind them, I really fell in love with systems design and the way of thinking like this, of things don't need to be one off. You can repeat the best parts and save some space to really focus on unique needs instead of reinventing the wheel every time. And this really rings really like exciting to me to be able to optimize like this.
Can you explain a bit more about what system design is?
Well, the way I'm thinking about it is just the idea of looking for patterns and creating a template for it if it doesn't need a unique experience around it, I guess, and saving the really truly unique experiences for more bespoke design. And then anything that's really repeatable is creating a way to answer it, either a design service or a template or a UI that you do just reuse. And I would also say putting like feedback loops in place for when that stops working too. So, and then just creating this whole system of patterns that are getting feedback on if they're working, when they stopped working, and then all of your focus can really be around the unique experiences that you need to focus on to make something fit.
It would be really helpful if you could maybe give an example of what might be system versus bespoke.
At the time, I had a job and we were working on a design system for enterprise. It was for internal tools that were being made. So we made all the basic bootstrap-ish UI so they could reuse that and they could just grab the code. But then what became sort of more bespoke was the education around that and the way these people felt empowered to use such a system. And then there came unique needs, like somebody needed to create like data interfaces or more dashboard. And so we could put a lot more focus on how to create data interfaces or graphs and templatize that and patternize, like that system that fit that exact need. But the UI was, basic. It was buttons and navigation. So there didn't need to be focus on that.
Does that mean that system design isn't necessarily just UX and UI?
Yeah, it's not at all. I mean, it can be applied in UX and UI. It's really more of the system part of like the feedback loops and checking for health and making sure that things that you're feeding a problem are actually checking that problem off over time, just diverting resources in general to more unique things. I think that's not just UX or UI. It can be all sorts of things.
So am I understanding correctly that a button is repeated multiple times? You would create a template for it that a client would be able to just edit it on their own, and that might be more of a system, whereas UI would be custom experiences?
I would say the button is the UI. It depends on how reusable it is and how customized that UI needs to be. So the button probably doesn't. It probably just gets a label. It only needs a certain amount of logic. We don't need to spend much time on that. There might be primary and secondary things like that so that you can create hierarchy in the page. But if somebody was making a dashboard, we could put a lot more attention towards how the graphs would be reusable and what are the limits on that.
It almost feels closing of the full circle that you got attracted to this, because in college, working with materials, it was also the systematic repetition that got you interested.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that I am drawn to grids and patterns. I did a lot of repeat wallpapers in college, in my installations, a lot of grids. There's something really interesting about the repeatable parts and then the parts where it is actually something unique is happening. I do think that's a theme.
So an art degree definitely still comes in handy. It's
for sure. I think it's just me as an artist. That's what I explore, and I'll probably explore forever in my art, which I do make still on the weekends. But I do think that's what's connected me to this work and kept it fresh.
And after your experience from agency, you started going in-house. But I also found it interesting of how you found those new opportunities. It seemed your internal compass was, what's an interesting job?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go in-house because working on that design system for the enterprise client, at some point I realized the system becomes tied into the rest of the company and how successful it can be. And it did seem really interesting to go into an enterprise and look at some of these processes at scale and the way something like this could live within it. So yeah, I think it just became part of the journey to see what that looked like and explore it more.
When you are finding these new opportunities, how do you find them? What's your criteria?
Within New York, I've always had my network help me. So when I've become interested, I've talked to my network and they've pointed out if there's something available that they know of. So the last, I would say 3 or 4 jobs had been like word of mouth through somebody. But as far as criteria, I'm pretty industry agnostic, I've realized. I think it's a lot to do with scale mostly than industry. So yeah, I'm just looking for opportunities through my network.
Is it that you find a certain company that you're interested in, or is it that you find a certain role on, say, LinkedIn and you reach out to your network?
Not the roles. I sort of make up what I think the role is in my head and just talk to my network and have the conversations of like what seems like a fit.
It's very different from the PM world.
It's just really talking about what's exciting on the project, at what scale. After the agency, I started speaking about, I would really love to see design system within an enterprise, what kind of barriers are in place from it being adopted fully, why different shadow design orgs get set up and don't want to use it, like what those barriers are. So when I talk about that, then somebody might say, oh, I know somebody or a company that has a design system role open. That's kind of how it's gone, is I've just asked for what I want from my network.
Is there a way that you keep your network alive and abreast of what you're interested in?
I feel like I get very close to my coworkers. It's just the way I work. So a lot of them I talk to quite often or have a coffee with or just kind of keep up to date with. I don't do much to keep that going other than that. I will say that it seems like the job market is a little bit different now, like that you couldn't just network to get a job. It just feels harder right now, I would say. But yeah, I don't know if I do anything other than like coffees, monthly coffees. I try to keep a lot of one-on-ones just to stay connected with these people as friends as well.
I love that it's not you're going in with, I need to manage my network, but it's more of just that human to human connection that you're trying to keep alive. The side effect of that is more interesting opportunities.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it like that. I like the way that you say it.
Amazing. And then we go from system design to there's a new area in tech that seems to be preoccupying your mind, the no code UX. How did that come about in your radar?
I don't know how it came about. I think I just saw the need in a real life scenario and it seemed really exciting. Just using design software within corporations and seeing how if their backlog doesn't have a feature or you're not able to report a bug, like how it can really affect your day. And just thinking through what if the 2 backlogs could merge and start feeding each other and creating these configurations for non-coding users. So what I'm thinking about is just a lot of the Figma updates that rolled out and they were shown recently. I mean, you're really setting up the file for automation and you can add plugins to then add another layer of features. But what if that plugin was self-created and that backlog also was feeding off of like Figma's and you had transparency into how they're updating their product? And just the stacking of that overall seems really exciting. I mean, no code is exciting to me or low code just because you get more empowered people. I think a lot of people want to mess around with design, not just designers. I'm seeing a lot of marketers that would feel really empowered around something like that.
For sure. I think especially with the hype around Gen AI and the blurring of lines between different what used to be traditional marketing versus coding versus design. I think it's a definitely very interesting phase that we're going into.
Yeah, I think everything's sort of blurring. And I think the more people that can be empowered to use design and UX and even create coded products, just the cooler everything's going to get. I don't think it needs to stick to just designers and coders.
What would you say in this phase of technological advancement that we're sort of going through? What would you say is a way for UX and digital experience designers to still be unique and provide value added?
I do think designers are always unique. I think as long as they're focusing on the real problem that's ahead of them and they're staying present in the moment, there really is a lot to enhance. I would say fix, but it might just be enhancing or tuning better to an audience. In my instance, it's like the business, like what is the real business need that you're seeing, or what is the real user need, instead of having a preset assumption of how you're going to design something. And I think then nobody will need to fight to not be unique.
So you don't think the blurring of lines between roles is necessarily a threat?
No, I think there's definitely enough for everybody. I do think like the overlap in skills just helps people speak different languages to each other instead of trying to just explain what's happening in somebody's world. Maybe both parties know that language and then they can start thinking through the problem a little different. So I actually think it just adds to the creativity. I don't think it takes away from job roles. They just, when something is going really well, I also think all the lines sort of blur.
Mm. Would you mind sort of walking us through what your work time consists of?
I will probably do it over a week and maybe not a day in the life of, because I think
Makes sense. Yeah.
it looks a little more average. But I would say that half of my time is just talking to people, talking to designers and seeing how they're doing, what they're thinking about. But it's also just connecting with the partners, the different capabilities. I would say that it's the one-on-ones, the human connection that's really important.
So you're sort of understanding what are their pain points, etc.
Yeah, and just staying connected, even brainstorming together, figuring out when to brainstorm with more people, continuing to talk through what's happening and how we can address it. I mean, I'm definitely in a lot of tactical meetings of things that need to get done, being a manager. I don't know, maybe a third of the time.
What would you say is the difference between tactical meetings and your one-on-one with XFNs?
There isn't necessarily an agenda. We can talk about all sorts of things in the one-on-ones. It's not necessarily to walk away with a checkbox on an item, but it is more to stay in sync in a different way. I mean, the admin meetings are obviously to stay in sync too. That might be looking at like a program backlog meeting, whereas the one-on-one, we're really just talking about what's happening, improving things, just new ideas.
Awesome. And your remaining?
I would love to say that it's heads down time. I mean, I think I'm working towards holding that amount of time for me to think through things, to be heads down, to give myself time that helps refresh me. Like twice during the day, I'll take a 15-minute walk and just listen to music. And that really does refresh me and help me think through things and give new ideas. I probably am also eating during this time at some point.
So this is sort of keeping yourself alive, but also deep thinking time.
Yeah, it's like re-energizing time.
And the nitty gritty of the designing and creating the Figmas, etc., is that within that 25%?
Yes, as far as like messing around with it, I have a team that does a lot of the more hands-on stuff. Being a senior manager, I don't touch a ton of the work as far as like really being the designer, but I do during that time mess around with the features and what's there, doing a lot of research of what's coming out, rolling out, how it can be used.
And that's why most of your time as a senior designer is on the alignment with XFNs.
Yes.
What would you say is the biggest difference between being an IC versus a senior designer?
I mean, the amount of talking, I would definitely say, and alignment meetings. So being a senior manager, I really need to talk to a lot of the business partners, make sure things are set up for projects, resources, check in how things are going. So that is just a lot more tactical alignment. And I would say when you're an IC, you get a little bit more heads down because you need it, because you need to be the one paying off the actual work.
Going back to your career satisfaction graph, there was a noticeable drop in recent times. Is that happening to do with being a senior manager?
So I am at a point where I'm sort of starting to think if it's the right fit to be so hands off. I am feeling a little bit like I would like to go back to the craft a little bit and be a little more hands on.
It's really interesting because especially in the UX design space, we've spoken to a few folks who are senior managers who mentioned a similar sentiment. And it seems especially true because you guys enjoy the craft of working with your hands and sort of the tinkering, experimenting aspects. What do you think sort of sparked, though, that thought of I might want to go back to an IC.
I mean, I actually think it's a couple things. So, sort of just looking at the economy right now and seeing how many reorgs are happening, I do think there is a slight fear of that if you stop touching the work, you're more disposable. So that's one thing. It's just like the fear of job security. I also think I get more satisfaction out of being in the work and being able to be curious in that way because some of the management you can't be curious in. They're like very set processes and ways. So I think that's another part. And also, I mean, this is just sort of in my own life. My daughter is older now, and I don't know if I need the same security. I was drawn towards a manager path because what I heard then is more money, and more money is more security for my life. But I do think it would be interesting to look at maybe walking away from that and just getting more in the work again.
Until this point in your career, your net worth trajectory has been fairly linear. I love the fact that you're taking a pause and reassessing that relationship with money and life satisfaction.
I obviously see that money helps everything, but I don't think that all jobs just for money will make you happy. So it's kind of the relationship of what are you doing to get the money. Definitely, if somebody gave me a pile of money, I think I would be happy. But like, I'm not willing to be very stressed to get the money. Yeah. So I think it's really looking at what I'm doing to get it. And yeah, how important it is, especially if it's starting to affect like my mental health or stress levels or anything like that. It's just really not worth it. And I also understand there's a ton of privilege in being able to say that. This is the first time where I'm not as, I guess, scared of making sure, my household's stable.
Was it a certain level of salary that allowed you to shift that mentality?
Yeah, a certain amount of salary and having it be stable for a few years. I think I also moved to a new apartment that was less money. I mean, it was a couple things that where I really optimized how much I was spending.
I find this super interesting because in big tech, we talk about the golden handcuffs. And once you reach a certain compensation level or status, or just as an example, just even the snacks that are provided in the
Right?
office, it's hard to let go of any of that.
For sure. I think about this all the time of like if I walked away from it, would it be really dumb of me? And what if I could never get it again? I mean, I think it's a risk to just decide to follow something different. I mean, I already know what it looks like to stay in it, I guess. And then I think, how happy will I be if this is over years? I mean, I understand that I'll be stable and that I'll be able to pay my bills. But yeah, I guess it becomes what's interesting and satisfying for the work versus just being taken care of.
I'm empathizing really hard here because I know this has been on my mind for quite a while. Partially, I think I'm a bit paralyzed from moving forward because plan B doesn't seem so clear to me. Like, I'm not sure what I would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I honestly have the same thing. I think the plan that I stick to in my head is like you won't lose your skills. Like I'll still know how to do these things. So I then start to maybe like worst case scenario of like what would be the worst it would look if I couldn't get a job, how would I make money and things like that. I'm not losing my skills by walking away from it. It feels like there isn't enough jobs right now and it feels like this big musical chairs and if you don't jump into one you're going to lose an opportunity, but I have to think that there's enough opportunities even if they don't look like full-time employment. So I think it's just being open to like what it looks like to make money that isn't full-time employment. And it's easier to walk away. But I think if you have the expectation that it needs to look similar either in money or the way the job is set up, it might be harder.
One exercise that I've been trying is picking a specific date, like 10 years. It's going to be 2033. What would I be doing in detail?
Mhm.
And when I went through that and thinking I would still be working in big tech day in and day out, that felt a bit like a wake up call. So I like what you're saying in terms of being flexible. Perhaps we all sort of need to reverse engineer if, to your very valid point, things are shifting and the economy is volatile and it might not be even our choice.
I was thinking through the 10-year thing that sort of scared me in my own head. I haven't done that exercise, but I don't want to think in 10 years that I'm just following another company's like plan. I want to be like feeding myself. I don't know, maybe some of the shifts are for better. It's a big risk to take, it feels like, but I'm feeling the pull for it myself. So I don't know.
It's just that time of age and generation when these thoughts prop into your head, but quite a lot to think about. This was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.